Hello and welcome to St Paul's Cathedral here in Melbourne on a perfect summer's day, a day when we again farewell one of our leading citizens, not a leading citizen necessarily for just Victoria, but indeed for all of Australia, one of the most famous names in the Australian business, indeed the world business landscape, Dame Elisabeth Murdoch. Hello everyone, I'm Tony Jones. Welcome to this special presentation throughout the GEM network and indeed 9MSN. Joining me for this special presentation from the 9 newsroom is Vicky Jardim. Vicky, it wouldn't matter how long this service goes for today, you just couldn't do justice to the life of Dame Elisabeth Murdoch.
That's right, Tony. Good morning, everyone. It's a beautiful morning and how fitting, because Dame Elisabeth Murdoch brought so much joy to people's lives. As you've just said, hundreds have started arriving here at St Paul's Cathedral. Actually has a capacity to fit about 1,000, and I'm sure every single one of those seats is going to be filled here today.
Well, very shortly, in fact, less than a few moments away, Rupert Murdoch will be one of the last to arrive, and we'll talk more about Rupert Murdoch in a moment, because he'll be paying one of the eulogies, of course, to his late mother. The Governor-General now arriving, and you know what we're seeing is not necessarily just politicians and dignitaries arriving, but also sporting heroes and just everyday Australians, because charity was such a large part of Dame Elisabeth's life.
That's right, Tony. Dame Elisabeth Murdoch supported more than 100 charities and causes, most notably the Royal Children's Hospital, the National Gallery of Victoria. She also had a great affiliation for the mentally ill and even helped prisoners as well. So she certainly had an enormous reach here in Melbourne and throughout Australia and the world.
Having said that she was a lady for everyday Australians, we can see former Prime Ministers, Malcolm Fraser, for example, arriving. John Howard arrived also. This was a lady that crossed political boundaries. There was no pro-Labor, there was no pro-Liberal. Jeff Kennett is another one who will be paying a eulogy, not as a former Premier, not as a leading citizen, but as a friend of the Murdoch family. And when the Murdoch family, you know, when it's so extensive and has been around for as long as what it has, I mean, obviously you make friends along the way.
That's right.
You also make enemies along the way, but I can't see any evidence of that at the moment.
That's right, Tony. I understand all living past Victorian premiers will actually be here today, as well as Joan Kerner, and as you said, Jeff Kennett has just arrived here at St Paul's Cathedral. And
we also saw James Packer arriving there at the cathedral, and that's yet another chapter, isn't it, in one of the most famous of stories for Australia, the media industry, the Packers and the Murdochs. I mean, there's a mini-series being based on that shortly. Right. So he is also here paying his respects on behalf of the Packer family, and as we say, Rupert Murdoch will also be here. And an interesting fact also, we were chatting with Brett McLeod from the newsroom a little earlier, in that the gap between Rupert farewelling his father and farewelling his mother is something like 60 years. It is quite extraordinary, and says as much about the longevity of Dame Elisabeth Murdoch than anything else.
That's right, Tony, and as you just mentioned, Rupert Murdoch will of course deliver one of the eulogies here today, as well as former Victorian Premier Jeff Kennett. Governor-General Quinton Bryce will also say a reading, so certainly some very high profile people that will be speaking here today.